Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to do the Sabaton history for the Ballad of Bull. We did the song The Ballad of Bull, which I really loved a day or two ago. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll put the link to it somewhere up at the top up there. Like I said, things are looking a little bit different. Bear with me while I'm figuring some stuff out. Specifically, the background and the camera spot where the webcam comes up or where the camera pops up. I'm trying to figure out the best way to get it to fit into that square without like shrinking it down to look goofy. Um, bear with me a little bit while I'm trying to figure that out. But I wanted to keep doing videos while I was getting everything figured out. So this is what we're going to do today. Sabaton Histories, The Ballad of Bull over Leslie Bull Allen. Let's get into it.
Some of the biggest heroes in war are those men who don't actually fight.
And one of them we wrote a song about, The Ballad of Bull.
Born in 1916, Leslie Allen had a tough time growing up in Ballarat in Victoria, Australia. His father was a strict and unforgiving man, and there were domestic violence issues in Allen's childhood. The Great Depression hit the family hard, and when the father abandoned them, Allen and his sister were sent to an orphanage. The work on the farm of the orphanage, however, gave Allen not only an eventual trade, but also steeled his body. And that hard physical work paid off, for his main hobby was Australian football. And he earned his nickname Bull from his technique of simply rushing over the other players. By April 19...
Australian football, is that rugby? I get all these mixed up because, America has all their own different stuff with the soccer and football swap and all that, but Australian football, I'm assuming that's rugby. Looked like a rugby ball.
1940, Bull Allen was 23 years old, out of a job, and in need of money. So he joined the freshly formed 2nd Australian Imperial Force. By comparison with the days of the Great War, the Australian military forces were in fairly bad shape, but conscription had been reintroduced in January 1940 after Australia had followed Great Britain into the new war against Germany. Assured by the British government that the ambitions of Imperial Japan presented no immediate danger to Australia's defenses, the 2nd Australian Imperial Force prepared to send forces to the European and African theaters. By September, Allen had undergone his basic training and was to serve as a stretcher bearer. He was too late to fight in France, so the Australians were instead eventually sent to take part in the Western Desert and the Syrian campaign to secure the Allied assets in North Africa and the Middle East. Bull Allen was well liked by his mates. However, he was far from being a model soldier, described as impatient and troublesome. And every now and then he got into trouble with his superiors by not following military conventions or by simply disregarding regulations. Allen had first-hand experience under fire. He carried wounded soldiers from the battlefield, often remaining with them for hours until proper medical help could be provided. But although Bull Allen was a big guy with a strong constitution, the stress of battle took a toll on his psyche. After another incident with superiors, Allen was sent to a hospital in Palestine to be treated for anxiety neurosis, which was better known as shellshock, or nowadays as post-traumatic stress disorder.
This isn't uncommon. Even, there are stories about soldiers who really thrive in war in comparison to everybody else around them. Even in those circumstances, everybody has a breaking point, and you'll actually see in some of those stories, you'll get glimpses of even these incredibly strong, mentally strong soldiers who do really well in warfare like this. You'll still see moments where their psyche will almost completely snap. They'll almost completely lose it. at least for a short stint of time. It's really kind of crazy. And when you read about people like that, it's, on one hand, you can't believe how well they do in that environment. And then on the other hand, it's still bizarre to kind of see them snap because of how strong they are, how well they do. You know, it's kind of bizarre on both ends.
Sometimes war is killing, sometimes it's saving lives. From Australia's shore, Bull Allen went to war. Sometimes war is saving, sometimes it's taking lives. Thanks to one single man, a dozen more survives.
As the threat to the Allies in Northern Africa and the Middle East receded, the Australians were desperately needed back home. The Allies had underestimated the reach of Japanese ambitions. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese southern offensives of December 1941 and early 1942 pushed across the archipelagos of Southeast Asia. Even the Australian city Darwin came under a Japanese carrier attack in February 1942, and an invasion of the Australian mainland seemed to be in the cards if the Japanese advance could not be checked. In late 1942, the already war-weary Bull Allen left the Middle East when his battalion was sent from the desert plains to fight in the humid jungles of Papua New Guinea, alongside contingents from the Netherlands, New Zealand, Canada, and Britain. The Japanese had won some early victories over the outnumbered and outgunned Australians, who repeatedly had to withdraw and cede territory. But by late 1942, the Australians began pushing back. The war along the Kokoda Trail was fought over treacherous terrain in a murderous climate. Waist-high kunai grass and dense undergrowth hampered movement, while the thick tree canopies blocked out the sunlight. Steep razorback ridges crisscrossed the jungle, and muddy swamps engulfed whole large areas. This was no place for grand maneuvers or big flanking operations, but a place for small groups of heavily armed men fighting for each position and dugout. Climate was an enemy in itself. The oppressive heat and the general dampness from the moisture in the air sapped the strength of even the toughest troops in mere days, and poorly planned operations were defeated just by the hostile terrain. Plagued by insects and diseases like malaria, both the Australians and the Japanese suffered more casualties from disease than from enemy fire.
The war in the Pacific in general, or the theater of the Pacific in general during World War II, is just a horror show. I mean, it is, like Indy says there, it's not just fighting. You aren't just fighting. And I know in war it's hardly ever just fighting, but the climate is as much of an enemy. You know, the terrain, the climate, everything like that is as much of an enemy as everything else is. It was just a brutal theater. And not, you know, it was brutal for everybody that fought there, the Japanese included.
Often it was almost impossible to evacuate the wounded, as the driving rains turned the few trails into knee-deep mud. Sometimes it could take up to 12 stretcher bearers to transport one wounded man. Initially, Japanese commander Hitoshi Imamura planned to advance his forces all the way to Port Moresby, though he was eventually stopped from this by stiff resistance. After 6 months of bloody fighting and raiding, the Allies had achieved a stalemate, but with the arrival of American General Douglas MacArthur on the scene, plans were made to reverse the positions and drive the Japanese out of New Guinea. MacArthur did not refrain from criticizing the performance of the Australian troops and what he saw as a lack of aggressiveness in advancing against the Japanese. But realistically, MacArthur had little experience of what it meant to fight in the dense, murderous jungles of Papua New Guinea. Soon, the Australian units were reinforced by American troops. With the U.S. Air Force dominating the skies, the combined power of the Allies moved against the Japanese strongholds. The goal was to capture Lae and Salamaua while preventing the enemy from any further advances. By July 1943, the Japanese hold on New Guinea became increasingly desperate, but they were far from beaten. Bull Allen had already been awarded the military medal for rescuing several wounded comrades from the battlefield while under fire, but now he found himself at the foothills of Mount Tambu, a strategic point near Salamaua. Japanese commander had mistakenly thought that the Allies would push directly towards Salamaua and had concentrated his forces on the mountain top. So now his forces were caught out of position. But despite the Allied success in outmaneuvering the enemy, the Japanese were still deeply entrenched and were ready to fight for Mount Tambu with fanatic determination.
And this is the issue basically in the entire Pacific. You have these entrenched strong points that the Japanese are holding with and there's all sorts of different theories or ideas, and they're all backed by some level of evidence on why the Japanese were so fanatic. And to be honest, it's probably a mixture of a handful of different things. You'll hear like that they were told that American soldiers were doing the most gruesome and brutal things. And so if they surrendered, that was what was going to happen to them. You also have the kind of culture, internal belief system, all of that. It's probably different for every soldier, and it's probably a mix of a lot of those things. But it definitely was. The Japanese held strategic strong points, and they were absolutely fanatic about holding them. It's why the island hopping campaign for the U.S. in the Pacific was so costly. I mean, extremely costly, no matter how big or small a given area or island was. It cost a lot to take it.
Bull's battalion slowly ground away at the Japanese positions in the foothills, which soon resembled a moonscape. Trees were knocked down by constant machine gun fire, and the ground was dug up and flung everywhere from all the mortar shells. The Allies managed to secure the lower slopes and ridges, but the Japanese staged several counterattacks to throw them out. The Australians prevailed, though, and once the Japanese had lost hundreds of men in futile attacks, they seemed vulnerable. The Australians prepared to storm the summit.
Almost return, unwilling to brag, alive and humble at heart. No, then back again, Bull just carried on. Under fire, he carried them out one by one.
On July 24th, they advanced, but they were repulsed by the Japanese and took heavy casualties. High command still wanted that mountaintop taken, and another assault was planned for July 30th. This time they would send in an American battalion. As the Americans headed up the slopes, Bull Allen and the other stretcher bearers, as well as Australian mortar crews, were to stand by and offer assistance if called upon. The Americans attacked, but like the Australians, ran into entrenched Japanese defenders with machine guns and mortars. Casualties were heavy, and the wounded soon littered the field. Allen watched as the wounded cried for help. 2 American medics were shot right in front of his crew by Japanese snipers, so without receiving any orders to do so, Bull Allen stepped forward and ran up the muddy hill and into the chaos of the battlefield. Soon after, he came back down the mountain with a wounded soldier on his back. Already, this was a feat of major courage, but Allen did not stop and ran back once more. And once more after that. Time and time again, he came down the mountain, struggling down the narrow gully of the trail with yet another wounded man on his back. Then he set off again towards the sounds of battle. Supposedly, the other men made bets whether Allen would return another time. His luck had to run out at some point, and yet return he did. The American soldiers described him as a godsend. It was like Allen had some sort of aura of invincibility around him, calm and seemingly unconcerned for what was going on around him, he just focused on getting the wounded from the battlefield.
Yeah, Ironside. I talked about this for the actual song, The Ballad of Bull. But what medics do, and, looking at the Great War, World War II, the running into battle, and not just into battle, but basically, it's not really no man's land in World War II, but it really is. Like, people aren't running to the enemy line. They're shooting. And so like I said before, the fact, or just the whole juxtaposition that everything around you is kill or be killed, and you are nothing about what you're trying to do is killing. You're trying to save somebody, and then save somebody else. Just my guess is that's the way he thought about it too, is just save this one person, and then once he got that person, was like, all right, well, let's save one person, and went back in. But I don't know. I don't know if I could do that.
12 times Bull Allen went into the fray, and 12 times Bull Allen returned with a wounded soldier on his shoulders. He finally stopped because his body could go on no longer. His sleeves, his trousers, his hat were all in tatters, riddled by bullets and shrapnel, but miraculously, Bull Allen came out untouched.
Wow.
Allen would physically survive all the fighting in New Guinea, but the battle for Mount Tambu further damaged his mental health. After a fight with his superiors in 1944, Bull Allen was discharged from the army for constitutional temperamental instability and emotional retardation with anxiety symptoms. His continuing problem with shell shock was worsening, so he was sent back home to recover.
That's a hell of a way to describe somebody suffering from PTSD. I've talked about this 100 times before, but, what's his name? Philip Gibbs, I believe is his name, wrote the book. He was a World War I British correspondent who followed the army around and wrote about everything. Not everything. He wrote about what the British government would allow him to write about. He wrote a book after the war called Now It Can Be Told. And in the book, he describes the way that he sees. He doesn't say shell-shocked. He says, basically he's describing, he goes to the front line. He sees what these troops are asked to do, asked to live with, the conditions that they're in, the hell that they are in. And then he goes back behind the front to the back lines, and he sees the way that they're treated by superiors because of the condition that they're in, because of what he just saw them having to go through on the front. It's just it's rough. The whole thing is rough. The treatment of, in World War I, what they would call cowardice, but the treatment of soldiers with shell shock, and I prefer the term shell shock over PTSD, but the treatment of soldiers with shell shock, especially at this time period, is, man, it's rough. But that's not to give a pass to the way soldiers are treated today. In a lot of cases, that's a whole other thing.
Recuperate. It is said that his behavior was erratic, often volatile, and at one point he even stopped speaking. For 6 months, he locked himself away working on an uncle's farm until he finally found the strength to speak again. Slowly, Allen recovered and eventually got married and raised a family. But the trauma of the war never left him. All his life, Allen would suffer from flashbacks and the effects of PTSD, which sadly could not be adequately treated or even properly diagnosed back in those days. Nonetheless, the 12 men whom Bull Allen saved on Mount Tambu remembered and revered him for his deeds long after the war. He received many letters from them and their families, and even Eleanor Roosevelt, America's first lady during the war, wrote him several times. Although,
wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that. And what's so unfortunate about the not getting an adequate diagnosis or treatment or anything like that is 6 months of locking yourself up and not speaking is probably one of the worst things that you could do. Like that, I don't know. I feel for the guy.
Though Australia has never officially recognized his actions to this day, the U.S. awarded Leslie Bull Allen the Silver Star, one of their highest awards for gallantry and bravery in the face of the enemy.
Why has he not been recognized by Australia? That's what?
And had he been an American soldier, he would likely have won the Congressional Medal of Honor
Yeah.
at least once for his bravery that day.
Yeah, so I believe the only foreigners to have received the Medal of Honor was when essentially the unknown dead, so the U.S. has the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, where they have the unknown soldiers from, different major wars. And I believe that the other side of that, so whatever the other major belligerents who were allies to the U.S. in those wars, I believe those are the only foreign Medal of Honors that have ever been given. Or it may have been for the Great War, for World War I, but don't quote me on that. But I believe the unknown soldiers from the other countries who did the honoring of unknown soldiers were awarded with a U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor, and I believe those are the only foreigners that have ever gotten one.
Well, this is an interesting song for me, Per, not just musically and historically. It's because unlike most of your songs, I did not know the story of this until I heard the song and knew the song. I mean, I knew about Audie Murphy before I knew who Sabaton was, things like that. But I didn't know this, so this was a fairly new story for me. So how did it come about that you wrote just this song?
It's a bit odd song. I mean, Joachim started to write this on tour. He was playing it, and I was really convinced that it has a big potential, but it's a bit... we didn't know how we would orchestrate this song at all. For this, we asked a couple of good friends of us, and two guys from our hometown, Daniel and Philip. We have been doing a couple of things together over the years, and Daniel was actually playing keyboards in Sabaton a long time ago. They had some ideas about how to orchestrate it in a way of making it more like a ballad and an anthem than a proper metal song. And we thought, okay, could be interesting. And when the song was ready, it was really difficult for us to find any topic for it. We said, we need a heroic topic, but it needs to be something that is not really connected to war, because it doesn't carry that feeling. So after doing a lot of research about like peaceful heroes or non-fighting heroes in war, we came with Leslie Allen, that the song is about, and we like the story a lot, and it fitted so well into the lyrics. This song is like mixed appreciated by fans because of the way it is orchestrated, the way it sounds.
I love it. I mean, seriously, I love it. It's probably one of my favorite songs from them. They do really well with everything, but this one was so different and so emotional almost that I felt like it was one of the greatest things I've heard from them.
It doesn't really typically sound like Sabaton. Some people really love this song, some people don't. It's a song we never performed live yet.
I was going to ask if it was something that you performed often live or not.
No. It's very difficult as well for us to figure out how we could possibly perform it live. We are in contact with with descendants of Leslie Allen down in Australia. We thought maybe if we come to Australia at some point, we will have to play it somehow, and we have been talking a little bit how we could possibly orchestrate the song.
Well, speaking of touring and any future tours of Australian things, now, the last time you and I met, we were in Minsk doing some filming because you were just about to go off on tour, just about to go to Eastern Russia to start. You started in the far east of Russia, right?
Yeah, in Yukno-Sakhalinsk.
And then your tour was canceled. Now, how far had you gotten in Russia before it was canceled, and what did that mean for you and your crew, and how has it affected the band and stuff? So since the actual cancellation,
we were pretty much halfway through the tour. We made about half of the shows. We were supposed to do 18 shows, all in all, and we made 9 out of them. And now we have rescheduled the rest for November, but it was a tough decision. But nothing. It was beyond our control, of course, when we had to go home. And since then, the Sabaton machine, the touring machine of Sabaton, has been standing still. No more shows for a long time. In the middle of the Russian tour, we were supposed to announce another arena tour all across Europe. And it was something we first postponed and thought maybe we can release it in May or something, and we still keep the dates on hold. But somewhere in April, I realized that we will not be able to do an arena tour in the time as we planned.
I think they just started. They're back on tour now, and they started somewhat recently, right? I believe that's the case. I'm subscribed to them on YouTube, so I get their alerts and stuff. I think they're back now.
2021, so we had to cancel that. But there's a big chance that the next show we're gonna do is when we are back in Russia, it's where we ended, and then that's where we start.
You're starting Yekaterinburg, eller? Or?
We will not start in Ekaterinburg. The tour has changed a little bit routing due to the availabilities. It's very difficult to rebook something during this time. Very difficult to get anything done. There are some venues that don't exist anymore. There are promoters that have gone bankrupt. There are agents that don't work anymore. It's a lot of things that just doesn't exist anymore.
But what about like touring insurance and stuff for things that happen? How does that work with the Russian shows? I mean, there must be insurance for something, a tour this big.
Well, at the time when Corona hit, it was very difficult to have an insurance for pandemics.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay.
Very few people actually had that.
Yeah.
In the terms of the Russia, there was no insurance for this. We have to work in good faith and come back with a plan and make sure that agents, promoters, band, everybody, crew members, that it keeps on. In this case, we pay the full crew salaries to the guys, even for the canceled shows and stuff like that. Not leaving anybody behind, and we sought immediately.
Yeah, that's awesome. Everybody's just, everybody was kind of scrambling, and not just Sabaton, literally everybody, I feel like, around the world was scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. So that's cool that they paid salaries.
Immediately to find a solution for the promoters to regain their lost profits by booking new shows where there was a possibility to make up for the damage caused. And I think we succeeded pretty well in this.
Well, that's really cool. And it'll be great if you guys actually can finish the Russian tour, obviously, later this year. So not least because people will get to see you play, all the people that wanted to see you, especially in all those towns over Russia. Good luck getting out of Moscow and getting back home after all this time. I'm sure it'll feel great to get home.
Man, this whole conversation has a whole new context from today.
And I'm happy that I could actually get back to my place in Stockholm eventually. All right, well, that is it for today, but we will see you next time.
Here on the Sabaton History Show.
Yeah. All right. See you guys.
All right, so that was Sabaton history over the Ballad of Bull, Leslie Bull Allen. That was a great story. The song was amazing. I think they have a part two on this for Sabaton history on combat medics, so I'll probably check that one out soon also. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I will put the link to the description, or I'll put the link to the Discord in the description box down below. And I'll see you all next time.